What is going on, guys? It's another video from Hazmat Trucker, and today I just wanted to talk about my experience in the oil field as a trucker. But if you guys want me to talk about anything specific, I'll certainly be happy to make a video about it. Just let me know in the comments section down below. That being said, so for those of you who don't know, I spent a winter in North Dakota in the oil field out near Williston about 3 years ago now. So for this video, I'm going to break this first down into what my experience was in the oil field, and then I'm going to break down some of the pros and the cons of working in the oil field versus doing something like fuel hauling, which I'm doing now. So for my experience, I spent a winter about 3 years ago in the oil field up in North Dakota near Williston. And overall, it was a pretty good experience. And I had gone to the oil fields as a result of making a financial mistake, which I've mentioned in previous videos, but basically spent out of my budget consistently for a long time. And then an emergency came up and had to reorient myself within trucking and figure out what I wanted to do long term. And so, long story made short, I ended up deciding to go into hazmat specifically. So shortly after I had gotten my hazmat and my tanker endorsements, first done this thing called research, and I found out that an easy way to get into a hazmat job with little to no experience, because I didn't have any hazmat experience and I only had about 16 months of driving experience at the time. Easy way to get into a hazmat field, because there weren't any jobs currently at the time that were near me, was to go to the oil fields. Now, for me, I looked at two different oil fields, and there's more than what I'm about to list, but I looked at the Permian Basin, which is down in Texas, West Texas oil field, and then I looked at the North Dakota or the Bakken oil field. And right off the bat, I noticed doing my research that the North Dakota jobs paid anywhere from $5 to $6 to even $8 higher per hour for the same job. That's primarily, from my research, due to the fact that no one wants to work in the extreme cold of North Dakota. So I decided, you know what? Screw it. I already don't mind the cold as it is, and I'm just going to go for it. So I started applying around and landed a job hauling natural gas from pipelines to oil rigs. And so that was actually pretty clean work. Certainly dangerous in the aspect of working near the oil rigs, a lot of tight spaces, dark, especially when I started working at night. But overall, it was pretty easy job. There were several women drivers actually doing it, and I started out at $29 an hour versus the $22 an hour I was making as a seasonal construction worker. And so huge pay raise. And then about a month or two later, I bumped up 31 an hour because I was willing to go to nights. And so here I was, $9 an hour higher than what I was making at my seasonal construction job in South Dakota. And so for this job specifically, and it was a great company, honestly. So for anyone looking in Williston for work, if you're looking to get into hazmat, look up Valence Natural Gas. Great company, great boss that I worked for. I have honestly nothing to say bad about the company. It was awesome. For those of you who don't know, just in general, for most oil field work, you're going to be on a rotation, especially for the guys who don't actually live there. For example, if they don't want to move to Williston, what most people will do, like myself, is will sign up for a rotational schedule, and that will vary company to company and position to position. But for my specific company, what they offered was 21 on, 9 days off. And so what that meant was you worked 3 weeks straight, or 5 days on, 1 day off, 5 days on, 1 day off in a 21-day rotation. And then you were completely off work for 9 days in a row. So 21 on, 9 days off. And it was actually pretty good balance overall. and the company again was awesome. Ultimately, I ended up moving into fuel and moving into a different state. That's when I had moved to Wyoming about 2.5, 3 years ago. And just for your information, if you lived in Williston, if you're a single guy and you didn't have a family to go back to somewhere else in a different state, and you wanted to just live in Williston, I think my studio apartment was like $900. Granted, this was 3 years ago at the time, but your 9 days off were optional if you really wanted to. And what most guys did is they worked through their entire 9 days. So they just kept working on that 5 on, 1 off schedule. And so they would end up working, most days out of every month just to rack up the money. And in fact, that's kind of the case with most jobs in the oil field, is you can really rack up the hours so long as the contract is there, the work is there. What I'll get into as one of my pros and cons here shortly. But the running joke was 40 hours a week in the oil field is part-time work, because again, I actually worked, I think I was pushing my 70-hour clock pretty much every single week, if not working a little bit above 70. And then there was a certain point in time, I believe in January, Governor of North Dakota declared a state emergency because we were low on natural gas, or I forget. Basically, he removed the hours of service limits for our specific niche of trucking. And so we could work 7 days a week, and a lot of guys did work 7 days a week. I didn't. I just kept my 1 day off and then, went back to work the next day. But a lot of guys, when that hours of service limit was removed for a temporary period of time, they worked every single day just to max out that clock and max out that money. So there are situations like that where you can work until your heart's content, and 100-hour work weeks, especially in the oil field, are not unheard of. That's a fairly common thing. That being said, I'll get into the pros and cons of oil field work specifically. So the first pro I view is that it's really easy to get into, as far as if you don't have any experience in trucking, let alone hazmat work, because people are going in and out. The oil field has high turnover, as well as there's always new contracts and old contracts ending. And so there's constantly a reshuffling of employees. And that's across, pretty much from my knowledge, that's across every single oil field, not just North Dakota. So if you don't have experience and you're looking for an easy place to get either into a specific niche like I was, as far as hazmat or just general trucking experience, oil field's a good place to get your feet wet and get your hours in, get your experience in. And that moves into the second pro of what I view for the oil field, which is you're able to rack up your hours and rack up the money pretty quickly, especially if you're smart and you keep your expenses low and you live minimalistically. I've heard of guys going into the oil field for just 5 or 10 years and then just retiring because they've made that much money. So that's not what the vast majority of people do, and I'll get into that in a bit. But there is certainly that opportunity if you're willing to do that much work. The next pro, which probably a lot of people wouldn't view as a pro, but specifically for me, I view it as a pro, is a lot of chaining experience, especially in the North Dakota winters. You were going off the road a lot. So for our job specifically, and for most jobs in the oil field, you're not going to stay on the highway. You're going to go off-road, and you might go down a steep hill. You might go up a steep hill to get to wherever the oil rig is. And so that requires you, in a lot of circumstances, to chain up, and you'll get pretty good at it. So as well as getting a lot of manual experience, because very, very few trucks in the oil field are automatics. A lot of them are manuals. We specifically ran 18 speeds at my company that I was working for. So you'll get manual experience, you'll get chaining up experience, and it's valuable to have. And then the last pro, which may or may not be a pro for you guys, is the cold. Because of the extreme cold that I faced up there, which the very first day that I showed up in Williston, it was December, about 3 years ago now. The base temperature outside was negative 35. And if you included the wind chill, it was negative 55. So regardless of how many layers of clothing you have on at a certain point, if you're out in the cold too long, you're going to die. So working in that extreme temperatures on a regular basis requires you to be a creative problem solver, as far as instead of, in certain situations, chaining up, you can just throw your chains underneath your drives. Or if you don't want to go to that extent, you can always try and find some rocks or some sticks to shove under your drives, just to try and get some traction to get underneath or out from underneath the trailer. So there's plenty of circumstances where it forces you to be creative about how you're going about your day. So moving into the cons, I would say the biggest con is, as I had kind of mentioned previously, is because there is a constant shift in what contracts are going in and out, or maybe a certain oil well has dried up. There's going to be a long-term lack in consistency in the oil field. Some guys may have to go to a different oil patch or a different company or a different contract. But there is that change in a long-term scale in the oil field. Comparatively speaking to fuel hauling, for example, in the 2.5+ years I've done fuel hauling, I've not had a single week in fuel hauling where I worked all 5 days that was shorter than about 48 hours for that 5-day period. So if I was working all 5 days, my shortest week was about 48 hours. So in the oil field specifically, it's not that consistent. Certainly with natural gas, you're going to have a slower period in the summer. And then it's going to really, again, ramp up in the fall and winter, going into staying consistent still into the spring. The next biggest con for me was burnout can happen pretty easily, especially with how many hours you're working on a consistent basis. And so that's why for me, when we had that removal of the hours of service requirements for the state emergency, I decided, you know what? It's not worth the money, especially because I was working at night at the time too. And so that compounds the issue, at least for me, it did. So I actively chose, you know what, 70 hours a week is plenty. I don't need to go to 80 to 85. That's crazy enough as it is. And that's another reason why there's a lot of turnover from the employee side, is because you can only work, 80, 70, 80, 90 to 100 hours a week for so many years before you have health problems, or you just simply burn out. If you're going to go into the oil field, I would highly recommend just pacing yourself as much as you can. Obviously, you're going to have long days, you're going to have long weeks, but if there's anything I can recommend, be militant about making sure you can get good quality sleep every single night that you can. Okay. Because that's really going to save you. And on top of, trying to eat well, and obviously working out when you can. And that's pretty much when you're working, 70 to 80 hours a week, that's pretty much all you can do, is get your 8 hours of sleep, maybe get a 30-minute, to a 1 hour workout in, and then you're back to work after you've, prepped for your lunch or whatever. So, but if you manage your time well, you can still get that in. The next biggest con is that the money that you'll make in the oil field will tempt you to inflate your lifestyle. So my very first paycheck for 2 weeks of work was $5,000, maybe $5,500. And then my first month, so my first full month working there, I had earned $8,000. And so when you hadn't made, and I certainly hadn't made that kind of money before, especially when you're going home for 9 days in a row, you can be really tempted to go just spend that money. I was digging myself out of the hole at that point in time. So it wasn't super hard for me to stock that money away and save it instead. But what happens is, for most guys in the oil field, is that they will, instead of saving that money and living below their means, they inflate their lifestyle to the point where they can't get out of the oil field. They have to stay in the oil field and keep working those really long weeks and really long hours, because they have indebted themselves with houses, toys, trucks, anything and everything that you can pull debt on, they will. And they justify it in their head by saying, well, I'm making this good money, and so therefore I deserve to have all these toys that I'm barely even going to have time to play with anyways, because I'm working so much. So don't make that mistake. If you're going to go in the oil field, sock your money away, use it wisely. And that brings me to my last con for the oil field. I don't know the specific stats on it. Working in the oil field is one of the more dangerous jobs that you can do, certainly within trucking, but just in general. There's a lot of injuries that happen and a lot of deaths. And I don't mean like, someone's dying every single day. That's not always the case, but there are quite a few workplace deaths that happen every single year that come from the oil patch. And so especially when you're working at night in crowded places where there's not a lot of space and there's a lot of things going on at once, you just have to be careful. It does add quite a bit of risk to the job, and again is why there's so many people that don't want to do it. But that's why you're making so much money, comparatively speaking, versus people who are not willing to do the job. So take it for what it is. I certainly got a lot out of the oil field, learned quite a bit. I appreciated the suffering that I had to do there, because it taught me a lot, and it became a big part of the man I am today, is doing that oil field work. So if you guys disagree with me, or if you want me to make a specific video about something else, please just let me know in the comment section down below. If you found this video helpful, please give me a like and subscribe to the channel, and I will see you guys on the next one. God bless.